The forest has a way of holding its secrets, deep, ancient, and patient. People walk its trails every day, never suspecting that something may be watching them from just beyond the tree line. In this world of towering pines, endless undergrowth, and moonlit paths, countless individuals claim to have glimpsed a creature that defies explanation, a massive, shadowy figure said to move with both intelligence and primal power. This is the world of true Bigfoot encounters, the world that hikers, hunters, families, and rangers swear they have stepped into for just a moment before it vanished again into the dark. Some people call Bigfoot a myth, a campfire legend, a story passed down through generations for entertainment. But others, those who swear they've seen something unforgettable, believe otherwise. The stories they tell are raw, emotional, and vivid enough to make even skeptics pause. These are the kind of experiences that stay with a person for life, moments where fear and fascination collide. And whether or not you believe in Bigfoot, once you hear these encounters, you may begin to wonder what really walks the forests when the sun goes down. One ranger recalled an experience that shook him so deeply he left his job less than a year later. He had been patrolling a remote section of the park after reports of campers hearing strange noises, heavy footfalls circling tents, low growls, and the eerie feeling of being watched. The ranger brushed off the stories at first. Wildlife, wind, imagination, these were the usual explanations. But one night, while driving along an old service road, he saw something ahead of him step out from behind a tree. It wasn't a bear. He had seen hundreds of bears in his career and knew their build, their movements, their behavior. This thing was taller than any man, broad-shouldered, covered in thick hair, and standing upright. The headlights caught its eyes, and for a moment he swore there was intelligence, almost a warning, in its gaze. Then, in two powerful strides, it disappeared into the forest, leaving only the sound of branches snapping in its wake. The ranger didn't report the sighting, he didn't want to be laughed at, but he never drove that road alone again. Another story comes from a family on a weekend camping trip. They arrived at a secluded campsite by a lake, eager for a quiet getaway. The first day was peaceful, filled with fishing and exploring the shoreline. But that night, just after midnight, they were awakened by a long, mournful howl echoing through the trees. It wasn't a coyote, not a wolf, and certainly not an owl. It sounded deeper, almost human, yet not human at all. The father stepped out of the tent to listen, and that's when he heard the unmistakable crunch of heavy footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the other side of the clearing. The family huddled inside the tent, barely breathing, as the footsteps approached their campsite. Something huge exhaled loudly, almost like a deep grunt, and then they heard it sniffing the air. After a few tense seconds, the footsteps moved away, and eventually the night went silent again. The next morning, they found a set of footprints in the damp soil by the trees, prints far too large to belong to any person in the group. They packed up and left within the hour, never returning to that lake again. Some encounters are brief glimpses, moments that happen too fast to process. A hiker in the Pacific Northwest once described seeing what he thought was a man in a large fur coat moving between the trees on a distant ridge. He raised his binoculars to get a better look, but as soon as he focused on the figure, it crouched down and then sprinted on two legs with astonishing speed. The hiker was so startled he dropped the binoculars. When he recovered them, the figure was gone. Another group, experienced hunters, had an encounter they couldn't explain during an early morning trek. They had set out before sunrise, walking a narrow trail through dense forest. Suddenly, the woods around them went silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. The hunters froze, sensing something was wrong. A few seconds later, a massive shape moved through the trees parallel to them, keeping pace but staying out of sight. Every time they stopped, it stopped. When they resumed walking, it did too. The hunters had never known a bear, deer, or any animal to behave like that. It felt like something was studying them, tracking them. Finally, one of them shouted into the trees, demanding whoever, or whatever, was there to show itself. In response, a deep, resonant growl filled the air, so powerful it vibrated in their chests. That was all they needed. They turned around and walked back the way they came, refusing to speak until they reached their truck. The encounter changed their beliefs forever. Then there are the stories of strange warnings, moments when people feel the forest itself is urging them to leave. One woman, a solo backpacker, described a chilling experience during a 3-day trek. On the second evening, as she was gathering firewood, she heard knocking sounds, 2 heavy thuds on wood, coming from up the slope. She paused, listening. Then, from farther away, she heard 2 more knocks, as if answering the first. She didn't know what it meant, but something about the rhythm felt purposeful. That night, just before she fell asleep, she heard what sounded like something large walking around her campsite. It didn't approach, but it circled the area for nearly an hour before finally wandering off. In the morning, she found large footprints around the perimeter of her camp. She ended her trip early, convinced that something had been warning her to leave. A similar story came from a man who had a terrifying late-night encounter while driving home through the mountains. His truck's engine began to sputter before dying completely on a remote road with no cell service. As he tried to restart the engine, he heard something moving through the brush nearby, something big. He shined a flashlight out the window and caught a glimpse of dark fur and a massive hand-like shape gripping a branch. The creature let out a low growl, and the man locked his doors immediately. For several minutes, the creature circled the truck, brushing against the sides, tapping the windows, almost as if inspecting him. Just when he thought he was about to become prey, the creature let out a loud snort and stormed off into the woods. A few minutes later, his truck started without issue. He has never driven that road at night again. Other encounters are filled with mystery rather than fear. A young couple hiking along a remote trail once reported finding a series of massive footprints leading across a muddy stream bed. The prints were spaced far apart, suggesting a stride length impossible for any human. Curious, they followed the tracks for a short distance until they abruptly stopped on a large boulder, with no tracks leading away. It was as if whatever made them had simply vanished. They stood in silence, trying to understand how such a thing could happen, but eventually decided it was best not to investigate further. Some of the most unsettling encounters involve shadowy figures seen just at the edge of vision. One late-night motorist described driving along a winding rural road when he saw a tall, dark shape standing by the treeline. At first, he thought it was a person, but as he got closer, the figure stepped back into the shadows in a way that seemed almost too smooth, too fluid. His headlights briefly illuminated something massive, covered in hair, with long arms and broad shoulders. The figure disappeared instantly, blending into the darkness as if swallowed by it. The driver said he nearly slammed on the brakes but was too afraid to stop in case the creature approached the car. A group of teenagers camping in the woods once witnessed something they still talk about years later. Sitting around the fire, they heard rustling in the bushes nearby, followed by a loud cracking sound. Expecting a deer, they shined their flashlight toward the noise, only to see two glowing eyes staring back at them from a height far above human level. The eyes reflected the light intensely, and as the creature stepped closer, they saw a massive silhouette, tall, wide, and unquestionably upright. Panicked, the teens ran to their car and sped away, leaving their camping gear behind. When they returned the next day, their tents were still there, but the fire pit had been disturbed and giant footprints surrounded the area. There are even encounters that seem almost protective in nature. A man lost in the woods for several hours claimed that he heard heavy footsteps following him. Every time he veered off the main path, a loud snapping noise would erupt behind him, as if something was pushing him back on course. When he finally found his way to a ranger station, he looked back and thought he saw a tall figure standing at the edge of the trees, watching silently before turning and disappearing into the forest. He believed, strangely enough, that the creature had been guiding him toward safety. These stories share common threads: massive footprints, strange howls, shadowy figures, and the overwhelming feeling of being watched by something powerful and intelligent. With each encounter, the witnesses come away changed. Whether terrified or fascinated, they all agree on one thing: whatever they saw felt undeniably real. These accounts continue to fuel the mystery of Bigfoot, a legend that refuses to fade with time. People still report sightings, still hear unexplained sounds in the night, still stumble across tracks too big to make sense of. And although no definitive proof has ever been captured, these stories collectively form a compelling question, one that echoes through the forests just as those strange howls do. What if Bigfoot isn't a myth at all? What if, deep in the places we rarely go, something ancient and elusive still roams, watching us as we walk through its world without even knowing it? The forest keeps its secrets well, but for those who've had these chilling encounters, the truth feels much closer than most dare to imagine.